On the evening of 15th December 2022, Cara Alexander had been smoking cannabis. She'd been doing so every night for weeks, probably much longer. She had two sons, Elijah Thomas, age 2, and Marley Thomas, age 5. Now at some stage, the boys were in their pajamas, ready for bed, with Elijah also wearing his diaper. Cara decides to run a bath. She takes her children, places them in the tub, but then she holds them underwater for a minute or two. She then dried the boys, put them in clean pajamas, and laid them together, tucked in under duvets on the same bunk bed. She then spent the night sleeping with them. Wow. Yes, she slept with their dead bodies. The next day, the boy's father, Selvin Thomas, he became concerned because he had not heard from Cara. You see, he was scheduled to look after the boys over the weekend. He came into the house. She told him, "Don't worry, they're sleeping upstairs, leave the boys alone." But then he went upstairs and the kids were not responding. Selvin, who had split up with Cara just 3 months earlier, began screaming, Cara, what the F have you done to my children?" When he returned downstairs to call for help, Cara had run away. It took the police around an hour to find her. The Metropolitan Police said forensic analysis of Cara's phone, which had been found in a filled sink, showed it had been in regular use in the run-up to the murders. But on the day the children were found, no calls were made or messages sent. This led detectives to believe that she had intentionally been avoiding people following their deaths. Now, Cara herself has been described as a caring and affectionate mother to both her children. A witness who saw them days before they died, they said both boys seemed really lovely and well behaved. One witness to the family said she never shouted or raised her voice at the boys. She never showed violence to the boys. Now, the evidence from the pathologist said both boys had some scratches or scrapes that children pick up from playing or tumbling over, but there was no signs or suggestion at all that they'd been physically mistreated before the incident when they died. 3 psychiatrists gave evidence at trial because, of course, only a psychiatrist can explain why Cara would do this. They claimed Cara was in a psychotic state when she took her son's life. This was the analysis of Dr. Farnham. He felt for her this was abnormal behavior and it did not fit with the kind of person she was. Another doctor, Dr. Blackwood, his diagnosis claimed the episode was cannabis induced. Cara had a previous psychotic episode in 2016. Cannabis probably played a part in that episode as well. And in the aftermath of that episode, there was an agreed diagnosis of psychosis. It's unknown if she was aware that cannabis could trigger another psychotic state, because another doctor, Dr. Ratnam, testified that she might have been psychotic. Now, in the trial, the judge referred to the children's father finding his deceased sons next to one another as the stuff of nightmares. Prosecutors said they built their case on showing the boys could not have accidentally drowned, and that the only reasonable explanation for their deaths was that Cara caused them to do so. Now, in terms of the way the children were treated, the judge said there was every sign Cara was a caring and affectionate mother to both children before the events of the 15th of December 2022. He pointed out that their father said Cara never shouted or raised her voice at the boys and never showed violence towards the boys. The judge said, "From all that I have read and seen of you, I have no doubt that every day when you awake, you will remember and grieve for the little boys whose lives you snatched." For the judge, there were 3 important pieces of mitigation. Firstly, she not only lacked any previous convictions, but before that terrible evening, she had been a caring mother. That stands as a stark contrast to the history that normally confronts the courts when a child's life is taken or when they're being consistently mistreated. Second, the judge believed she was in a psychotic state, and she may not have been told that her previous psychotic state could be brought on again by cannabis. It is inconceivable she would have harmed either child had she known this. As a matter of public policy, the law at times treats self-induced intoxication as aggravation, and in homicides, the law excludes the effects of such intoxication from founding the partial defense of diminished responsibility. The legal question the judge had to address was whether, on the facts of her case, can he treat a psychotic state caused by the voluntary taking of drugs as mitigation. As in, if you knowingly take drugs, well, you know there's going to be consequences. However, he believed because she did not know it would make her psychotic, he would take that into account and he would be lenient with her. What do you think of that? He said the heavy use of skunk or hyper-strong strains of cannabis can plunge people into a mental health crisis in which they may harm themselves or others. The 3 psychiatrists who gave evidence disagreed about a number of things, but on her psychosis, they were unanimous. The judge believed, despite the fact that this was all her doing, she will mourn Marley and Elijah for the rest of her life. From all that he had read and seen of her, he had no doubt that every day when she wakes up, she will remember and grieve for the little boys whose lives she snatched away. Now, before I give you the conclusion of this case, I do have the story of Joanne Sharkey coming up. Insane case. Make sure you stay tuned. Cara herself was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Detective Chief Inspector Paul Waller, who led the investigation, he said, "This is an incredibly tragic case, which has left a father without his 2 beloved boys and a family without 2 young brothers. Cara Alexander will spend the next 2 decades behind bars, where the memory of what she has done will haunt her forever. To the family and friends of Elijah and Marley, while no amount of time will erase the pain, I hope this sentence serves to bring some semblance of justice. I hope you can now move on with your life." I don't know. I feel like the judge was just way too lenient. But then again, 20 years, is that enough time? Comment, tell me what you think. Now the case of Joanne Sharkey. In March 1998, Joanne Sharkey gave birth to an infant boy. She was alone and gave birth unaided in the bathroom of her family home. At the time, she was suffering from severe depression, and this impaired her ability to form a rational judgment and exercise self-control. The infant was born alive at full term, but died shortly after. She subsequently placed the body into trash bags and into her car, driving for around 40 minutes to a wooded area and leaving the bags containing the body in a little way beside a public path. This was during the afternoon of Wednesday the 11th, 1999. She was seen by a witness and the body was then uncovered by another witness 3 days later. Medical evidence suggests the baby was born a few days earlier. But the question is, why did she do this? How did she give birth by herself? Well, let's look back at her life. And during this period of her life, she was 28 and living with her husband. She had been with him since she was a teenager. They had another son. At the time, he was 3 years old. She had returned to full-time work after maternity leave and seemed to be coping. But that was a facade. She was in fact suffering from postnatal depression. This was not a case of the baby blues, but a far more sustained period of depression which impacted upon her physically and mentally. She experienced profound sleep disturbance, exhaustion, heightened anxiety, and chronic feelings of inadequacy. Her relationship with her husband deteriorated and she suffered a loss of appetite and significant weight loss. And just so you know, that is super key. When a woman gives birth, her boyfriend, husband, spouse, partner, whatever, he needs to take control and understand that whatever she says, however she acts over the coming weeks or months, just let it go. We as men will never understand postpartum, but it is a real thing. And given her deteriorating relationship, it was in this context, about a year after her first son's birth, she became pregnant again a second time, something she became aware of around the 4-month stage. Although her husband was the father and she was in a settled and supportive environment, she could not cope with the idea of a second pregnancy. At the time, she was underweight, a symptom of her depression, and her pregnancy was not detected by others around her. Her relationship with her husband was under strain, and even he did not realize she was pregnant. Joanne sought no medical help and mentioned nothing to her family. This was not simply a matter of her not wanting to be pregnant. After all, had she wanted to end the pregnancy without informing anyone, she would have been able to seek a termination and not risk her condition being discovered. But maybe her mental health was such that she effectively denied the fact of her pregnancy even to herself. But it wasn't until 2023 that when cold case detectives found a match for her in the National DNA Database. Nobody knew about this baby. Nobody knew who this baby was. Now, the area in which the baby was found back in '98, it was called Callans in the north of England. Local people gave the baby the name Callum because of the similar name. Forensic investigators found wads of tissue paper had been put into his mouth and throat and found injuries consistent with asphyxiation after birth. Hundreds of people were interviewed. DNA swabs were taken from local people and some young women were even arrested after their own family suggested they may have been responsible. The discovery sparked a nationwide hunt for the mother of the infant, but it was in 2023 detectives made a breakthrough. How? This is gonna blow your mind. So, a routine cold case review found that the DNA of Joanne's firstborn son, Matthew, remember the 3-year-old back then? Well, all these years, he's obviously grown up. He was arrested for an unrelated offense. They took his DNA, they put it in the system. The cold case officers took a random check at the DNA database and they found Matthew, his DNA matches Callum. Let me say that again. The police needed that 3-year-old to grow up, somehow break the law, get the DNA in the system, and then find a match. Wow. It's like the story has come full circle in a way. Joanne was then tracked down by police and arrested on suspicion of murder. She had kept the baby's birth secret from everyone, including her family. Now, when she was at trial, she admitted manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The judge himself satisfied that she had little recollection of this time, she had blanked it all out these years. The psychiatrist, Dr. Plunkett, has described her account of this event as an experience of derealization, something often associated with an intense dissociative experience, arising during a period of severe stress, distress, or trauma, and where the sufferer can perceive the world or their immediate context as unreal, distant, or distorted, and which may give rise to a numbing of pain sensation. After all, she did not recall suffering labor pains during the birth. She said she did not look at the baby and can only recall that what might have been some groaning or a gurgling noise, not the cry of a newborn child. Although she told the police she put her hand down the baby's nose and mouth, she was later unsure whether that was an accurate recollection or whether she was trying to make sense of things she was being told. Police knew that she must have put tissue into the baby's mouth and throat. Joanne, however, had no recollection of this. Although she did remember the basic action of wrapping the baby, she couldn't recall fetching the bags in which his body was found. She remembered placing the bag carrying the baby in the footwell of the car, but not of any awareness of when this was or whether the baby was then alive or dead. Now, no medical examiners were able to find a definite cause of death. The autopsy findings did not establish that the infant died of asphyxia caused by another party, but did not exclude the possibility. There was a bruising, but the examiner couldn't pinpoint how it happened. The theory was that after the infant had been born alive, Joanne most likely deprived him of oxygen by covering his nose and mouth or placing tissues into his mouth and throat. But another doctor, Dr. Kennedy, who was asked to assess Joanne upon her arrest, him and other experts agreed that her mental ill health substantially impaired her ability to form a rational judgment and exercise self-control. There was no evidence of premeditation, and nothing else could explain her actions other than this abnormality in her mental functioning. Considering her psychotic state in the period following the death, Dr. Kennedy observed that there is evidence she did possess functioning skills and consequential thinking. I mean, when she got home, she cleaned the bathroom and she must have disposed of the placenta. And she transported the body in 2 bags, presumably to prevent it being seen or blood being deposited in the car. That said, Dr. Kennedy also acknowledges that the trauma of the birth would have expected to have caused a further deterioration in her mental health. There was evidence of a continued sense of dislocation. Driving away from her home, she had no sense of where she was, or whether this was immediately following the birth or some hours or even days after. She had never been able to describe her actions and has no recollection of what she did with the placenta. Now, there was a lot of publicity about the discovery of the body at the time, particularly locally. She tried to avoid watching the news, but suffered severe nightmares and would wake up sweating and shaking. She continued to say nothing to her husband, although in her despair, she often thought about walking away or leaving her house and family. In the months and years that followed, she developed symptoms of anxiety and panic, remaining in low mood and avoiding family or socializing and becoming increasingly withdrawn. She eventually saw her doctor about her panic attacks in 2002 and was prescribed antidepressants. She explained, however, that she always felt able to pretend to others that things were normal, which was easy as she isolated herself in her home. Now, her husband obtained higher paid work. This allowed her to resign from her own job, and she later went with him when he worked abroad. And then it was in 2023, during a periodic review of the National DNA Database, a match was found which identified her and her husband as the parents of the deceased child. They were then both arrested and taken to the police station for interview. And there are 3 points that stand out from that interview. Number 1, she was clear that this was entirely on her. Her husband had nothing to do with it. Number 2, she did not deny what she had done. And number 3, she had carried this with her the whole time, thinking about it every day. Her police interviews were characterized by her admissions, albeit she was unable to recall many details. And she spoke of her relief that this had finally come out, and of how she had been haunted by what she had done, describing this as horrendous, the worst thing ever. So, to conclude on the story, in April 2024, she was charged with the murder of her child and with endeavoring to conceal the birth of a child. She initially entered not guilty pleas, and in her defense statement, there was no acceptance that the infant had been born alive or that she caused its death, and it was indicated she would rely on her mental state at the time, diminished responsibility. It was claimed that this started once the child was born, and it was further stated that she was unable to recall or reliably account for behavior in any detail during and in the immediate aftermath of the birth. The prosecution observed 2 legal issues. 1, whether the infant had been born alive, a point on which she was unable to remember, or number 2, as to the severity of her mental illness. So they used Dr. Plunkett, who spoke with Joanne. He produced a psychiatric report that addressed the question of diminished responsibility. But upon the completion of his report, Joanne then indicated that she would admit her baby had been born alive and was willing to plead guilty to manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility. She was then rearraigned the morning of the 6th of March 2025 and entered those pleas. So given she pled guilty, the judge had to decide what kind of punishment she should get. What punishment do you think she should have gotten? But this was the thinking of the judge. He recognized that she is an educated woman in her late 20s, back in 98. She was able to hold down a job with the benefit of family support, etc. Mental ill health can, however, impact anyone, and he was clear that she suffered a lengthy postnatal depression. And this depression, by consensus of psychiatrists, substantially reduced her ability to think rationally and substantially weakened her ability to exercise self-control. The prosecution pointed to elements of her conduct that could nevertheless suggest a degree of competence, control, or determination in how the killing might have been carried out and in how she disposed of the body. The judge did reflect carefully on this point, but felt there's a need to distinguish between basic reactions to circumstances and evidence of rational and controlled behavior. The judge said, "You have not found it easy to articulate such is your personality, but the evidence is clear. Not a day has passed when you have not dwelt on these matters, appreciating the horrendous nature of your crime." So with this, he gave her a 2-year suspended sentence. Joanne is now 55 years old. I don't know how a woman suffering clear postpartum should be punished. So comment, why don't you tell me?